St Mary's Lodge, a once grand family house on Lordship Road in Stoke Newington, North London, dates from around 1843 and is the last remaining of several similarly grand homes built on the west side of Lordship Road around that time. In 1843, Lordship Road north of Hackney Brook had very few buildings on it yet. At the junction with Manor Road was a toll gate across Lordship Road, which charged for passage towards Seven Sisters Road. The gatekeeper's house was where the Manor Road United Reformed Church stands today. St Mary's Lodge was designed and constructed by the architect and surveyor John Young for himself and his wife Caroline Petty Young, their 9 children and 2 servants. A prominent architect of the day, whose work includes the original 1860s Cancer Hospital in the Fulham Road and Lawton Lodge, the Sussex mansion of the 1848 Lord Mayor of London Sir James Duke, Young was to serve as District Surveyor of the City of London's Eastern Division for 25 years. Though the Church of England appears to have owned the freehold on the land on which St Mary's Lodge is built, there is no indication that the house has ever been owned or maintained by St Mary's Church in Stoke Newington. The house's name probably just reflects the fact that in Victorian times, areas were often referred to by the name of the church parish in which they were situated. It is also possible that Mr Young took inspiration for the name of his new home from the impressive 15th century St Mary's Church that dominates his hometown of Mildenhall, Suffolk. As might be expected for a house designed by an architect for his own use, St Mary's Lodge was endowed with stylistic touches that were to become mainstays of John Young's professional design style. The arched windows and terracotta brickwork accents seen in the house are 2 examples of features that can be found in many of the architect's later projects. In the 1860s, still during the Young family's residence in the 13-room house, a stable and tack house were added to the north end of St Mary's Lodge. Detail taken from the 1870 Ordnance Survey map shows the new additions, as well as an elegantly laid out back garden featuring trees or shrubs lining a path leading to an ornamental feature at the garden's western end. The Youngs lived in St Mary's Lodge until John Young Sr.'s death in 1877. In 1878, William James Crabb, the owner of a corn merchant's on Kingsland Road, moved into the house with his wife Lavinia, their children Lavinia, Alfred and Hugh, and 2 servants. Just 6 years later, however, and leaving children of 16, 14 and 7 years old, William Crabb died at the age of 46. Lavinia would die just 5 years later, aged 51. Both are buried in Stoke Newington's Abney Park Cemetery. An interesting footnote to the Crabb family's association with St Mary's Lodge is that young Hugh Crabb would grow up to be the father of Lionel Buster Crabb.
Crabb.
Christian names?
Lionel Philip Kenneth.
The famous World War II scuba diver, whose wartime exploits were made legendary by the movie Silent Enemy, and whose mysterious death was one of the biggest news stories of the late 1950s. The house was home to 5 more families after the Crabb family's tenure. Among them were, from 1929, a Dr. Herbert Edward Williams, who appears to have run his medical practice in the house while living there. During World War II, and with enemy bombs having already devastated many homes nearby, Dr. Williams and his wife left St Mary's Lodge. The house escaped the war without serious damage, and the Williamses returned in 1946. In the early 1950s, Mr. and Mrs. Cecil Goldie Hyde bought St Mary's Lodge. Mr. Hyde was a prominent local businessman who owned a 4-storey retail concern and art gallery on Mare Street in Hackney, and in the late 1940s was president of the Hackney Rotary Club. He also served as the rector's churchwarden at St John's Church in Hackney for many years. In an act of charity and philanthropy that was reportedly typical of them, in May 1959, Mr. and Mrs. Hyde sold St Mary's Lodge to the London County Council for £6,250, well below the property's market value at the time, on the understanding that it would be used for charitable purposes. From the early 1960s, the local authorities used St Mary's Lodge as a charity-run hostel for unwed young mothers. The following is read from a letter by Margaret Ann, a resident of the St Mary's Lodge home for unwed mothers in the 1960s.
I have some very fond memories of my time at St Mary's, and all of them good. Well, most of them anyway. When I stayed at St Mary's in the 60s for about 4 months, there was something like 20 of us there, aged from 14 to about 17 or 18 years old. I can still picture walking in the front doors. Sister Superior's office was on the first floor on the left. Our girls' day room was the big room at the back with the bay window, to the right of the wonderful great stairway leading up to the sleeping quarters. The rooms to the right were for the girls who hadn't had their babies yet, and to the left were the post-delivery mothers with their babies. I can still imagine myself back there, as everything is so clear in my mind. It is bringing a tear to my eyes talking about it, as we were not bad girls really. We just got pregnant, and at that time there was such a great stigma attached to that. When the other girls and I lived there, we all had jobs to do. Mine was having to get on my hands and knees to scrub the floors with a scrubbing brush, and polish the dining room floor by hand as well. Don't get me wrong, we were not ill-treated in any way. We used to sing hymns while we were doing our jobs, and we had to go to the chapel every day, which was also in the building. I have so many stories I could tell you about my 4 months there. I could write a book about it. The sad times when girls had to give their babies up, and the others who were able to keep theirs. When we found out in the morning that someone wasn't at breakfast, all the talk was, what did she have, a boy or a girl? We were innocent children really, and had our babies at Hackney Hospital. Even having to go there every week for our checkups, we were looked down on, and the nurses made a point of calling us Miss So-and-so, even though we all wore cheap wedding rings to fit in. Anyway, I'm happy to say I still have my son, and he will be 44 this October.
The Unwed Mothers Hostel was closed in the mid-1990s, and the building and grounds were left unmaintained and unsecured. Vandals, squatters and the elements have left the house and grounds derelict. In February 2002, the property was scheduled to go up for auction with a reserve price of £750,000. Somewhat mysteriously, the property was withdrawn from the auction the day before it was due to go on the block and sold to the trustees of the Torah Etz Chaim synagogue, located next to St Mary's Lodge, for £705,000, £45,000 below the published auction reserve price and some £400,000 below the market value of the property's 0.14 hectares of inner London land alone. In August 2005, St Mary's Lodge was completely gutted by fire of unknown origin. Witnesses report seeing persons known to have been squatting the property, leaving in haste shortly before smoke was seen coming from the building. In October 2008, it was discovered that St Mary's Lodge's grounds were being used as a used tyre tip. In August 2009, tradesmen were witnessed dismantling the building's rear wall and taking the bricks away. As this took place in broad daylight, it was assumed that this was happening with the owner's consent. In December 2009, the owners submitted redevelopment plans to Hackney's planning department. As of November 2011, these plans had been neither approved nor refused by Hackney. Currently, the owners of St Mary's Lodge are allowing the property to be used as a builder's storage and scrapyard, despite being in a conservation area zoned for residential use only.